Thank you very much for being here today, and I would like to start by thanking Elisabetta Bini for the very generous presentation, and I would also, of course, thank the Rachel Carson Center and LMU for hosting this today, and all of you for being here. So today's talk is titled Energy Transition in Sardinia, a Matter of Time, Space and Justice. And what is the talk going to be about? Well, it's about Sardinia, as many of you might know. It's an island in the Mediterranean, but it's also a peripheral region and a former mining territory. And I'm going to look at Sardinia and at energy transition within this island, paying particular attention to different elements such as time, space, and justice. And as Elisabetta already mentioned, I've been working on an article, and this is also a paper I wish to publish on a human geography and urban studies journal. So today's discussion would also be very helpful for me to understand what would be necessary to still focus on and to strengthen in this paper. But let's start with Sardinia. So here is the Mediterranean Sea, and here you can see Sardinia, which is at the center of the western part of the Mediterranean. Due to its strategic geographical position, it has always been historically crossed by different commercial flows, but also flows of other kinds. We had a presentation by Carmel Finley some weeks ago about tuna, and I'd like to mention that also tuna pass through one of the tips of Sardinia. But anyway, it has always been a place of encounters and exchange, mostly due to its position. And we might have in mind some images of Sardinia like this one. It is famous for its beautiful sea and its beautiful sand, and for this reason it's famous for tourism, but also for the diverse inner landscape of the island, which is mostly inhabited by a variety of population undertaking pastoral activities mostly, but not only, and also for the very rich forests that are there in the island. And unfortunately, maybe you have heard last summer about the huge fires that hit the Sardinian forests. And so to sum up, usually the image that we have of Sardinia is an image of a land of sun, of sea, and of traditional activities such as fishing and pastoral activities. But there is more, of course. So as we can see from this map, Sardinia is still considered one of the peripheral regions of Europe. And here you see the GDP per capita in EU regions. And from the colors, you can guess, so the more the orange the color and the least GDP per capita is in this region. So from the color you can guess it's one of the most peripheral regions of Europe. It has among the lowest GDP in Europe, but it's not the lowest in Italy, for example. And it also has lower employment rate compared to other parts of Italy and of Europe. Within the island, within Sardinia Island, one portion has particular conditions. So it has even lower employment rate, a higher old age index, and a significantly lower GDP per capita. And this area is called Sulcis. This is in the southern west part of Sardinia. And here we see again another map of Europe, but with a different focus. This time it's not about GDP, but it's about suitability and regional investment for solar energy, and also other kind of possible investment for wave energy production. So here we see how Sardinia is very relevant in this map, and it's probably one of the places where there are the highest investments, and there's the highest potential for solar and other renewable energy development. And for this reason, you see here in this part, Sardinia is the target of a special European investment fund for the just transition. There are just two places in Italy. One is Sulcis, and the other one is another locality in southern Italy, which is Taranto. They are the only targets for this fund. And here we arrive to something else. So it has this big potential, it has features that we know as an island, but it also has a long mining history. And in this map I tried to draw the last mining regions of Europe based on several data that you see mentioned there. And Sardinia had the last Italian mine, which closed in 2010. It was a coal mine, which closed in 2010. So my question is, how is this energy transition and how is this renewables potential happening in such a context which was having a coal mining industry until very recently, and which has a very long history related to industrial history and energy history? What happens if we look at time, space, and also at politics and at justice? So to try to answer this question, I'm looking at different sources, of course. And what I would like to trace very briefly in the time that we have today is a sort of short history, being an urban planner, as Elisabetta said, of what happened in relation to energy and industry in Sardinia, and in particular in the southwestern part, so in Sulcis. So here you see the first map is the map of a survey that was conducted to understand what was the mining potential of Sardinia in the 19th century, in 1871. So mining was exploited for long, as we will see in the following slides, but it was not such a successful industry. And for this reason, in the second map, you see the industrial development areas that were proposed for Sardinia after the Second World, because it was considered to be a region that was strongly in crisis and needed economic development. So these, as you can see in the map, are the target zones of industrial development after the war, thanks to multiple sources of finances. And in the last image, I just highlighted the areas that still nowadays have an industrial heritage, but in most of the cases, this industrial heritage is abandoned, is no longer an activity which is taking place. And in particular, I'm concentrating on the southwestern part, so on Sulcis and on the locality of Portovesme, to try to see this history again, but zooming in. So here in this image, you see we zoomed in Sardinia. We went to the southwestern part of Sardinia, which is the Sulcis and Iglesiente former mining region. So this area developed, as I said, as we have seen from the previous map, as mostly mining areas, but they also developed as industrial area in the locality of Porto Scuso, which is there, so on the tip. And as Elisabetta already mentioned before, I had the chance to encounter this kind of territory thanks to a sort of consultancy that we were doing with our home university, so the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Politecnico di Milano, and the consultancy was for the main Italian energy utility, Enel. So this study started from there. I went to one of these localities, to Portovesme, in the Sulcis area, and what I had in front of me was this. So the aim of that consultancy and of that research project was to accompany this energy utility to the decarbonization process of their power stations. They actually wanted to sell the power station because Italy had committed to decarbonization in the near future. So we just had to undertake a survey of the territory and of the architecture there. But actually, being there, I realized that specific locality, such a marginal locality, was actually very representative of a larger phenomenon related to energy transition if we look at space and at time. So energy transition does not just happen, it's not just related to funding, but it changes a lot and can have very big constraints related to the specific territory we are in. So here we see what is this territory, so of Portovesme and Porto Scuso. If we zoom in, so we see the small town of Porto Scuso, the tourist port, then we see an industrial port, and we see a large industrial area on top of it. And in the southernmost part of the map, Thank you. In the southernmost part of the map, you can see something very different. You see red on this part of the map, and these are the bauxite tailings that are the outcome of aluminium production. So what happened in this territory, actually? It's not just a peripheral town in Sardinia, but it's a place that from being a mining village turned into an industrial and now a post-industrial area, highly polluted by aluminium production mostly. And how did it happen, this transition, the transition that we saw in the territory there? So Sardinia at large, and in particular Sulcis, saw a big impulse of the mining industry from the 18th century, from the start of the 18th century. And this mining industry was mostly related to foreign dominators that were coming to Sardinia, that were mainly the Savoy dominators, and they started to mine the area with silver, lead, iron ore, and copper. But subsequently, of course, we do not go to the details, but subsequently, such mining areas expanded more and more and were acquired by several private companies, most of the time not local private companies, but from different parts of the world, from Norway and Sweden and England, for example. And in that second phase that we see here, from the mid-19th century to the 20s of the 20th century, not only the mining industry consolidated, but also mining-related infrastructures consolidated in the area. And what happened in the 20s was that something changed a lot in Italy. So there was the National Fascist Party that took over the government at that time, and what they did was to promote the nationalization of the existing coal mine and to push for an autarky in energy terms. So they gave a big impulse to the coal mining industries. This pulled a strong migration of miners, and they created a so-called coal town of Carbonia. But after the war, the coal that was mined from Sulcis and from that particular area we have been seeing resulted to be very bad, resulted to have a very bad quality. It was already known before, but with the autarkic policies, in a way, the government just pushed for that. But after the war, after the end of the war, the scenario changed a lot, and many factors were at play. There were several development programs that were targeting Sulcis, because after the collapse of the mining industry, unemployment rose dramatically and out-migration rose dramatically in the area. And so Sulcis was the target of several of these programs, such as the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno, or special plans for the development, regional and national plans for the development of the area. And we have to mention also that electricity at that time was nationalized, and that was part of the picture. It was part of the picture because the mining industries, the mines, became part of the electricity company, of the National Electricity Company, and in a way, the transformation of the mining industry was subsidized by the company and was subsidized by larger economic development programs. It is in this context that, in order to contrast the crisis of Sulcis, a new kind of industry was introduced there, which was mostly the industry revolving around aluminium production. And this kind of industry is a very energy-intensive industry. So what happened in the area was that the coal that was still there was used to produce electricity to fuel the production of aluminium in this area. This process, of course, lasted for quite some decades, but already in the 80s, such mode of development for the area started to be in crisis, with the start of the privatization of the industrial area, and at the same time, alongside with the economic crisis, a pollution issue started to rise. So the area was declared a high environmental crisis area, and the pollution was mostly related to aluminium production and to former mining extraction. So we arrived more recent years, after the 90s and after the privatization and the crisis. In more recent years, in 2007, 2008, a big crisis hit the area. Of course, not only this very peripheral area, but the global financial crisis had an influence also on this very peripheral area. And what happened is that the main industries that were located there related to aluminium production, such as Alcoa and Euralumina, they progressively closed their plants. So it was not an immediate closure, it lasted some years, but this led to rising very high unemployment, mostly hitting men above 40s who had been always working in the aluminium production industries or in the energy production industry. And it resulted, what happened in those years was also a rising environmental awareness, so a rising awareness regarding the pollution and regarding the problems of this mode of development and of this kind of energy production based on coal still. And this process, this increasing environmental consciousness was spread mostly among the younger generation, who were the same, who were in most of the cases out-migrating from the area. And again, in those years, as it has already happened before, in many decades before, again Sulcis was the target of special development plans, special economic development plans that were trying to save this area in a way from crisis. So, for example, it was included in the so-called extraordinary plan for the Sulcis area. It was declared as an area of complex industrial crisis, and therefore it had special funding. And more recently, as we saw at the beginning of the presentation, it is the target of EU funding of different kinds. So it is still the target of EU cohesion policy funds, as it has been for the last decades, but also it's the target of more recent funding programs, such as the Just Transition Fund and the Next Generation EU Fund. What is happening right now, what happened after 2012, so after the closure of the main industries, is that the situation, those plans were developing, the area was receiving fundings, but basically nothing changed. And the most relevant actors in the area, which were the economic actors leading the aluminium industry mostly, and the energy industry, they were silent. They changed the properties for some time, and right now what happened just after this area resulted, after this area was awarded with this special EU funding, is that new actors are coming into the picture, and that aluminium industry is not closing, but on the contrary, it is opening once again. And why is it related to energy transition? Because, as we saw, aluminium industry is strongly energy dependent, demands a lot of energy, and in this context, Sulcis and Sardinia at large should theoretically develop as a sustainable and green energy island, as a model in the Mediterranean, but the requirements that are currently there by the new owners of the aluminium industries are for more energy and for cheap energy. So what is happening is actually that gas is coming into the picture and that coal has not been phased out yet. So I would like to conclude by just mentioning some points related to energy transition and time, space, and justice, having in mind the case of Sardinia. Energy transition is not, of course, a neutral technical process, but usually there are long and often conflictual processes, and the outcome of energy transition is usually related to power struggles among different actors. And in this context, the peripheral regions such as Sardinia, and in particular the Sulcis area, might suffer from predatory attitudes. So we could say colonialism in the past, but we could see new forms of colonialism and even forms of inner colonialism from other parts of Italy. So they could suffer from, in a way, this kind of attitudes by other actors that are usually powerful and not always have a relation with a specific territory. So we could say they are often deterritorialized actors that are playing in the finance and energy domain. And this, in a way, increases existing inequalities and injustices that were already there since long. And what I would suggest with this is that just transition efforts and just transition programs should be concentrated more in the transfer of benefits from large and green, in a way, energy-consuming areas, like, for example, the rich metropolitan area in which my home institution is located in northern Italy, to peripheral energy production sites, regions such as Sardinia, and not have this exploitative relation. And we are going to speak also about this in the seminar that we are going to have next Monday, and Elisabetta already mentioned it. There will be many scholars from RCC that will be part of it, and I'm really, really glad about this. So I invite you all to join. It will be about petroleum, but we will speak about some of the issues I mentioned today. And I would like to thank you all, and again thank my home institution, Politecnico di Milano, and the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies, and the program on the project on territorial fragilities, but also the University of Alghero, which hosted me, and of course the Rachel Carson Center and other individuals who helped me a lot throughout the research. Thank you.